Whales are still a very vulnerable species at the moment because they suffer from a number of threats, including whaling, as you mentioned, but also noise pollution, lost and abandoned fishing gear, ship strikes. So there's a number of threats that our whales face in our oceans at the moment, and that's why we think action on whaling is still very important to preserve these species. Since the moratorium on whaling in 1986 brought through by the International Whaling Commission, we've definitely seen an upwards trend in whaling populations, but it's still estimated that 6 out of 13 whale species are still endangered or threatened. So I think in order to make sure that this upward trend continues, we should definitely make sure that whaling stops at this stage.
So basically the population of whales are increasing as a fact. Now, Giskes, you participated in the UN Ocean Conference last week. The conference decided that by 2020 that it should be effectively regulated in terms of harvesting and end overfishing, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing and destructive fishing practices. How can we determine whether what Japan is planning to do is overfishing or not?
I think it's important to remember how whaling actually is done and how cruel the methods used are for animals. Whales are hunted down, and the pursuit of whales can take hours until they slow down by exhaustion, and then harpoons are used with explosives to kill the whale. So it's not really a fishing method. It's hardly ever done by one single lethal shot. At the conference last week, the UN Ocean Conference, the international community once again came together and pledged action to better protect our oceans and the life within them, including whales, but also other species. So I think given the action taken by the international community, but also given outcries previously through the International Court of Justice ruling in 2014, as well as a majority vote by the International Union of Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, in 2016, it's clear that this practice clearly can't be called sustainable. Whales are very vulnerable. They are still a threatened and endangered species, and it's our duty to protect them from that suffering that whaling
Mr.
really
Wang,
is.
yes, Mr. Wang. Now, either the Convention for the International Regulation on Whaling, or ICRW, or the International Whale Commission stands for an overall ban on whaling. I mean, the ICRW stands for sustainable use, and the IWC left room for whaling for scientific purposes. So do you think these are legal loopholes that the Japanese fishing authority is trying to use? How can one determine if Japan's whaling is for scientific or business purposes?
There are obviously legal loopholes on whaling, and it is very clear that Japan makes use of these legal loopholes for its whaling, and we know that it is very important for us to protect whales and other endangered species and protect the ocean, including the marine resources and the environment. And Japan used the scientific research purpose as an excuse to whale hunting, and at a very large scale. And obviously this is not for scientific purpose. And for instance, in 2014, Japan killed about 1,000 whales. Such a large scale is obviously not for a scientific purpose. It is obviously for commercial purpose. And in my opinion, Japan should imply the International Court of Justice ruling and stop whaling in such a manner, in such a larger scale.
Ms. Giskes, now you have been writing articles emphasizing other threats that whales face. For instance, from the so-called ghost gear, discarded nets that kill thousands of sea animals. How much damage has been done by the ghost gear compared to whaling by humans?
Yeah, ghost gear is definitely a significant threat for marine animals, including whales. About 640,000 tons to 800,000 tons of ghost gear enters our oceans every year, entangling whales, injuring animals, and causing immense suffering. It's hard to compare whether the suffering from ghost nets has been bigger or smaller from whaling, and I also think it's not a relevant question. I think it's important that we address both. Just to quote a local case, for example, a few months ago we saw a whale being entangled off the coast of Shenzhen in commercial fishing gear, and even though fishermen tried very hard to rescue the whale, it died eventually. So I think it is important that we are aware of the suffering both from ghost gear as well as from whaling, and that we take action on both of those threats. At the UN conference last week, where countries came together, these threats were very much recognized, and in the call for action document, which was the outcome document of the conference, both ghost gear as other threats for whales and marine animals broadly were recognized that the international community should take action on these, and that's why we as World Animal Protection want to work together with governments on those.
Professor Wang, in 2014, as we have already heard mentioned, the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, found Japan's previous whaling program was not based on science and was therefore unlawful. Despite this, Japan resumed its summer hunting season in the Southern Ocean under a new program in 2015 and hunted 333 whales last year. So does international law show any sign of stopping Japan's whaling, and how many restrictions can the ICJ and other regulators place on Japan's whaling in the future?
Japan give whaling, although the ICJ ruling that it should stop. So we have seen that there are some limitations or restrictions on this, and I think besides the ICJ, which Japan should comply with, we should also use other international fora. For instance, the United Nations and some other forums to discuss the whaling issues and have more regulations and mechanisms to protect whales and other marine resources.
Ms. Giskes, now according to Xinhua's research, by 2015, the average consumption of whale meat in Japan has fallen to 30 grams per year for one person, compared to around 1.5 kilos in the 1960s. Now, since the vast majority of Japanese don't eat whale meat now, why is Japan still so keen on hunting whales?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and as your question highlights, Japanese whaling is not done for subsistence purposes, and even though they use the loophole of scientific purposes, there's not really a reason to be hunting those whales anymore at the moment. We understand there's some resistance from maybe a government or a cultural point of view to keep hunting whales, but we've worked with other communities around the world to change practices such as bear dancing, bear baiting, which also often are justified by cultural practices, and change these into sustainable livelihoods. So I think countries around the world have made a change. For example, Tonga, they've stopped their whaling industry and they've now moved to more practices like ecotourism, which actually bring more value to the economy. So because people want to see whales, and so I think it's important for Japan to consider maybe alternative routes to both conserve their whale populations and get a greater economic benefit out of them.
Yeah, there are other countries that are also practicing hunting, especially some countries in the northern European region. For instance, Norway and Iceland are also hunting whales on relatively large scale, and they claim that the Arctic Ocean has many more whales than the Northwest Pacific Ocean. Professor Wang, do you think they have a convincing argument?
I don't think this is convincing, because as we know that the scientific research and surveys of the Arctic marine resources and environment is not sufficient. And it is true that we human beings have not known very much about the Arctic, including the fisheries resources. And I think in order to protect the Arctic fragile environment, including the marine resources, we should take precautionary principles and be very cautious about fishing, including whaling in the Arctic and other sea areas.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ms. Giskes, I have 30 seconds to go, but I want to hear your take on this. I mean, the overall population of whales have been increasing, and whales are known for eating lots of fish, and especially baby fish. So if their population keeps growing, wouldn't that pose a threat to the fishery resources of many coastal countries? Very briefly, please.
No, not at all. Whales form a really important part of our ecosystem, and the whale populations, even though we've seen a slight increase, they're definitely not at the stage to where they were previously. So I think it's very important that we keep protecting whales. Science can be done without harming whales. There's no reason to kill whales at sea at this moment, and we should always continue to do that course.